Captions, and I want to thank you all so much for joining in this afternoon. My name is Diana Ratsumi, and today we are going to be hosting our event, Health at Every Size and Intuitive Eating. The whole U this month is working towards destigmatizing issues across mental health this May for Mental Health Awareness Month. And one area of life that can have a profound impact on our mental health is how we approach diet and nutrition. Today, we'll be talking with Harborview Medical Center registered dietitians as they explore its role in nutrition and its role in mental health. We're going to open the floor up to our panelists to discuss intuitive eating and the positive impacts that it can have on your physical health, mental health, and overall well-being. We'll also leave the floor open at the end of our session to have the panel team answer any questions that you have about food, societal pressure, mental health, and nutrition. Just a few Zoom room etiquettes that we'd like to move forward with during our session today is we love seeing your faces and we love hearing voices, but if we could actually have our mics muted during our session, during the presentation, so, it would be very helpful for our panelists to have that for discussion. And we're also going to utilize the chat room, to answer any questions that you may have. You're very welcome as well to raise your hand and unmute to ask questions when we get to that part of our presentation today. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn things over to our panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about intuitive eating and health at every size.
All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm Lisa. I'm one of the dietitians here at Harborview.
I'm Anna. I'm an inpatient dietitian at Harborview.
And I'm Karen. I'm also one of the outpatient dietitians at Harborview.
So thank you for just allowing us to talk about this topic today. Oops. Oh, there we go. Okay, so our objectives today are just to understand how food is connected to mental well-being and the negative effect that diet culture can play, and also to discuss intuitive eating and health at every size as tools to promote a healthy lifestyle for mental and physical well-being. So just a little overview of how food is related to mental health. This is, I would say in the last couple of years, more and more research is coming out that is showing that the food that's good for our physical health is also good for our mental health. There was a paper that came out in 2017 that kind of was like a meta-analysis that kind of looked at all of the current research that's out there and kind of put together a couple recommendations in terms of kind of dietary choices and how those can impact our mental health. So what the paper came up with was that following a Mediterranean or a DASH type style of a diet is actually beneficial for mental health. And so that's just consuming lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, legumes. They found that eating higher amounts of foods that are rich in omega-3s actually have benefit for our mental health and kind of reduce depression rates. Replacing unhealthy foods with wholesome, nutritious foods, limiting intake of sweets, processed foods, and fast foods. And then there's also kind of new research that's coming out to support the gut bacteria and probiotics and how that can have a beneficial impact on our mental health. So nothing super kind of crazy, but just following a general healthy diet has been shown to help depression rates and reduce anxiety and just overall be beneficial with our mental well-being. So I'm just going to switch topics just briefly and just talk a little bit about diet culture. So dieting in general has been linked to increased anxiety, increased depression, increased stress, and is linked to disordered eating behaviors. So what is diet culture? I know we're all on mute, so I'm just going to go ahead and say, but diet culture is a set of beliefs that focuses on and values weight, shape, and size over well-being. And so it's kind of a culture that worships thinness, and we kind of think of thinness as being equal to health, when that can be kind of a dangerous way of thinking. So as a culture, we continue to equate thinness with wellness, weight loss with effort. If you're thin, it means you're healthy. If you're fat, it means you're unhealthy. If you're losing weight, it means you've accomplished something. And if you're gaining weight, it means laziness. I think this is a very dangerous way of thought, but this is just kind of how our culture and our society thinks of weight. So just as an example, I had to look up on Wikipedia, but Wikipedia says there's 110 different diets out there, and all of them are basically encouraging weight loss as a ways to improve yourself and improve your health. It can be quite dangerous. People can go through some pretty extreme measures to lose weight, and that's basically just diet culture's definition of health, right? It's one that's synonymous with weight. So if you lose weight by any means necessary, it means that you're healthier. And if you restrict your eating and you eliminate food groups, then you'll feel better and be happier. And we know that that's not always true. So these are just a couple ways that diet culture kind of can show up in our life. So labeling foods as good or bad is one of kind of how diet culture can show up. And then you can kind of internalize that message and say, oh, I'm good because I ate this food, or I'm bad because I ate this food. Diet culture has you following external rules of what to eat, when to eat, and how much to eat, instead of paying attention to your internal kind of hunger, fullness, satiety cues. You oftentimes, when you're following really strict diets, you oftentimes become hypervigilant about your eating, and then that oftentimes kind of creates this kind of area where you might feel ashamed of making food choices, or maybe you feel guilty because you ate that food. And you're also very distracted, and you kind of pay attention more to the food rules than you are to maybe the enjoyment of food, or the pleasure that food brings you. Oftentimes somebody following a diet might say, oh, I can't eat that food because it's too high in fat or carbs or calories. Like that could be an example of diet culture. Using exercise as a punishment instead of exercise as enjoyment, and just doing something that you enjoy doing. Instead, you're kind of thinking, oh, I ate that donut, so now I need to go run 5 miles because I ate a donut. Food labels will oftentimes give you permission to eat. So if you look at the label and it's a clean label, you're like, okay, this is an okay food for me to eat. But if you look at a label and it has maybe more than 5 ingredients, that would be a rule that wouldn't allow you to eat that food. So that's diet culture. The scale dictates your happiness or worth. So if you stand on the scale in the morning and you're 5 pounds up, then you feel bad or you feel awful about yourself, versus thinking that the scale has nothing to do with your happiness or your worth. Oftentimes when people are on restrictive diets, they'll avoid social situations because the food that will be around, they just don't feel comfortable being around that food. So they'll just kind of back away and say, I'm not going to hang out with you. Definitely eliminating food groups. So there's a lot of diets out there that say you can't eat dairy, you can't eat grains, you can't eat sugar. And those are definitely external rules that are part of diet culture. Let's see what else. And then definitely focusing on your appearance. So when people compliment you on weight loss, or they might make a comment about how you're gaining weight, that is more diet culture than focusing on health. And there's definitely some research out there that is supporting intuitive eating. And Anna is going to talk a little bit about what intuitive eating is.
Thanks. So I think that Lisa did a really nice job of kind of setting the stage. You can kind of gather that there's this gray area. So we do have research supporting the fact that there are health promoting foods. And then we kind of have these mainstream media messages around diet culture, and that's infiltrated into our lives. So with intuitive eating, we present a framework of very flexible principles that was developed in 1995 by two registered dietitians, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch. There have since been kind of 4 versions, and the most recent of which came out in June 2020. So if you're interested in reading the physical book, you could grab the updated copy. So with intuitive eating, there are 10 principles here that we will just go through a few of. So I want to just highlight overall kind of how this framework works. So you see there are 10 principles. We'll go through the first 4, and then there are several more, some of which Karen will touch on. What's important to note with these principles is that it's helping people work towards a mindset of food freedom and breaking away from restriction. I think that often when people are coming from a dieting background, or maybe even just any form of restriction, there might be this tendency to want to follow these principles as a new set of rules, because, you know, some people tend to like control, or we tend to like things where they're very black and white. But just before we kind of talk about the principles, I want to emphasize that these principles are a process, and it's a non-linear process. So you might go through a couple of them and switch around the order, or you might need to revisit some of the principles. But the end goal is just shifting towards that mindset of food freedom. So we'll cover principle number 1 first, which is reject the diet mentality. And as Lisa so nicely described, there is a lot of harmful messaging related to diet culture. So just to look at this kind of cycle that dieting can bring someone into, you can start in the bottom left where it says, false evidence, eating must be constrained. So that's the messaging, the diet culture messaging, where we hear, okay, we need to cut out carbohydrates completely. We need to manage our weight and be kind of in the smallest size possible. And that's what promotes health. So we hear these types of false messages all the time, sometimes even from, you know, trusted health providers. And that kind of continues to make it ingrained in our brains. So we think that this is true. So then we move further on our cycle to dieting behaviors and restrictive behaviors, where you eliminate foods, you track, you know, your caloric intake or certain macronutrients, and you just kind of have this rigid set of food rules that you adhere to. And you may do that for a while, but what we know about dieting behavior is that it's simply not sustainable for the vast majority of people. Inevitably, that restrictive mindset will lead to increased cravings, and often you, quote, break the restraints. So you kind of fall out of, you know, your dieting habits, and you've been cutting out the donuts and the carbohydrates for a week, and then all of a sudden your body just wants it so bad that you end up maybe going to get, you know, 6 donuts or a dozen donuts. So that's that breaking restraint and the forbidden fruit backlash that we see further on this cycle. And then those behaviors tend to cause feeling of guilt, and you feel like you're kind of out of control around food. There's often kind of this shame that you feel essentially for breaking your diet, and then you just kind of go back into the cycle again. And it's difficult to break out of the guilt deprivation cycle when you maintain that diet mentality. So this is the founding kind of principle of intuitive eating, kind of the basis for all of the others, is that you have to break free from the diet mentality. The second principle, honoring your hunger, goes back to what Lisa was mentioning about the fact that we often are very responsive to external cues to eat. And that's okay in many situations. You know, social settings, you want to enjoy your food with friends and have birthday cake. But ideally, it's important for us to develop a strong internal cue that helps us determine when we're actually physically hungry. So the basis for adequate nutrition and health really is that you're biologically fed. So you're getting the nutrients that you need. And And often diet culture kind of hijacks that message and tells you to restrict to the point where you're hanging out on this lower end of the scale. You may feel like your stomach is growling all the time, or you're hungry. You have limited time to think about other things because you're so busy focusing on being hungry in that moment and not wanting to eat, essentially. Where we really would like to be is kind of in the 5 to 7 range, ideally, neutral. You're neither hungry nor full. 6, you're just pleasantly satisfied. 7, pleasantly full. So that's kind of the ideal range. And you can check in with your body, before you have a meal and see where you're feeling, and that can help determine what you want to eat and when you want to eat. And again, I just want to provide the caveat that, this hunger fullness scale, ideally we would be kind of in that middle range, but this is not a set of rules to adhere to. So sometimes we will be very hungry. We may miss a meal just due to other constraints, or other times we may be painfully stuffed. I'm thinking about, feasts with family or things like that, where you may overconsume, but that's okay. So just knowing that it's okay to go to either extreme, but the goal would be to kind of be in the middle, and that will require you to really tune into those internal cues and kind of mute the diet culture messages that you're receiving. Making peace with food is the third principle, and kind of another one of, the crux of intuitive eating. I feel that it's probably one of the more difficult ones, because this is the whole point of intuitive eating, essentially, is that you're moving towards food freedom. So that will involve you giving yourself unconditional permission to eat, which inherently minimizes those restrictive thought patterns. I think that allowing yourself unconditional permission to eat is probably one of the scarier parts of intuitive eating, because we're often told as a society, this food is bad for you, this food is good for you, don't eat this, eat that. And those types of kind of black and white thinking can be really harmful. So in order to give yourself unconditional permission to eat, it's helpful to eliminate that type of thinking. So getting rid of the labels. So this food isn't good or bad, it's just a food, and it's going to provide me nutrition. Donuts provide something, carrots provide something, and both of those things are helpful for your body in a different way. It's the same thing with labeling things as healthy versus unhealthy. It's very easy to fall into that trap of following the food labels and then kind of shifting towards a restrictive mindset. So with this unconditional permission to eat and, viewing foods neutrally, it enables you to eat what you really want in that moment. So you check in with your body and you decide what I actually want to eat. And of course, then you're able to eat foods without feeling that guilt or shame that we discussed earlier. And then the fourth principle is challenging the food police. So again, this ties closely to diet culture. You can see a definition on the slide. So the food police are a culmination of cultural influences and inner voices that police or regulate our food choices. It may provoke guilt or shame. I think it's helpful to think of 2 levels of the food police. So we have the inner food police, which is kind of that internal dialogue that we have going on, thinking, no, I shouldn't eat this. No, I shouldn't eat that. And that is impacted by a collective food police, which is that diet culture messaging. The 2 are very intertwined. And I think one thing that kind of we've discussed as a group is that the collective food police can show up in a variety of ways, sometimes seemingly very harmless. If you're trying a food challenge or a diet challenge, it can feel very good to be surrounded by people that are working towards the same goal. And often that promotes restrictive eating habits. And so that's a form of collective food police that you might kind of fall victim to without even realizing it. And then in order to challenge the food police, you need to kind of reframe how you have this inner dialogue going on in your head. So shifting away from this is bad or this is good to just a kind of mindset of neutrality and curiosity. So, if those thoughts do pop up, you're thinking this is bad for me to eat, try to question that and say, okay, is this actually bad for me to eat. Why do I think this? Where did I hear this? And what's causing this thought to pop up? What will happen if I eat this food? So just moving towards that neutral observation can be a really helpful, albeit difficult tool, which can help you to challenge that inner and collective food belief. Food police, sorry. And then by doing that, you're helping to reframe kind of the false beliefs and this negative self-talk that you may be unknowingly perpetuating by continuing to kind of follow the diet culture and food police messages. So just reframing towards that neutral view of food and body respect, I think can help promote just greater self-awareness and intuitive living overall. So we'll shift gears a little bit. Karen will discuss a couple of the other principles, and she'll start with a discussion on mindful eating.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So just to kind of continue with the whole concept of intuitive eating, the principle of mindful eating is a part of this. And the first concept is really about respecting your fullness. And this ties really well in with both what Anna and Lisa have discussed with the hunger scale and paying attention to how hungry you are, how full you are. And it really takes learning to trust your body and what your body's telling you. This can be pretty challenging, especially if you've been chronically dieting and following diet rules, to learn to trust your body again. And some of the tips that go along with this are stopping partway through a meal and just thinking, how full am I? How much more do I need to eat? Putting your fork down in between bites of food. If you find yourself in the kitchen and opening up the cupboard, stopping to pause to think, why am I eating? Am I hungry, or am I lonely? So just paying attention to kind of those hunger cues a little bit more. The second concept is about discovering the satisfaction factor. And I was really interested to read about the Japanese culture and how they have the wisdom to keep pleasure as one of their goals of healthy eating, or healthy living, excuse me. And so in our compulsion to comply with diet culture, we often overlook one of the most basic gifts of existence, which is the pleasure and satisfaction that can be found in the eating experience. This is from one of Evelyn Triboli's books. And when you eat what you really want in an environment that's inviting, the pleasure you will derive from will be a powerful force in helping you feel satisfied and content. So paying attention to, what you're eating, where you're eating, and, do you want something sweet? Do you want something salty? Other examples of just paying attention to what it is you need. And then also thinking about how you're coping with your emotions. And, if you're feeling sad, is there something you can do to help with your sadness, and recognizing your emotions and allowing yourself to have your emotions, and kind of starting to learn that food really can't fix your emotions. Next slide, please. So another concept is to honor your health with gentle nutrition. And this can include things like breaking away from the clean food club or clean plate club, not feeling like you ever have to finish everything on your plate if you recognize that you're starting to get full. And then promoting mindfulness during meals, whether it is paying attention to kind of how the taste of something is, or the texture. And it can be really helpful to kind of remove all distractions so that you can pay attention to your meal. So turning off, TVs, or putting your phone away during the meal, so that you're really truly able to focus on the food. And use nutrition to promote your satiety and fullness. So paying attention to what it is that you need and how to make sure you're getting a balanced meal. So for example, if you just have a salad, there's not much going on in there to really kind of create satiety. So maybe you need to add some protein and some carb to it, whether, if you cut up some apple and have it with some tuna, or, whatever it is you're craving, but just to try to get that balance so that you can be full and satisfied. Next slide, please. And this slide just kind of shows a real balance of different types of foods and how you can really kind of combine foods that maybe with diet culture are considered less healthy, like a piece of pepperoni pizza, but pairing it with a salad and really truly being able just to enjoy a balance of foods. And one thing to think about with nutrition too, that I think is a good thing to keep in mind is that there's really no failure with our diets. Diet culture tends to promote kind of a binary concept of pass or fail, or I ate healthy today, or I didn't eat healthy today, and that's not really a realistic way of thinking about our diets. So keeping that in mind, so you don't feel so bad about how you're eating. Next slide, please. This is just some of the research that is available out there on intuitive eating. There's certainly way more than just these 3 slides, but these were 3 that really demonstrated well the research that is out there. Next slide, please. So this is just a lovely picture, kind of, depicting the health at every size. And I grabbed an excerpt from one of Lindo Bacon, who's kind of one of the main people talking about HAES. And she describes HAES as a movement that helps us recognize that health outcomes are primarily driven by social, economic, and environmental factors, requiring a social and political response. It supports people of all sizes in adopting healthy behaviors, inclusive movement, recognizing that our social characteristics, such as our size, race, national origin, sexuality, gender, disability status, and other attributes are assets, and acknowledge that challenges the systemic forces that impinge on living well. So just really thinking about, there are so many things that go into who we are, and really learning to appreciate all of those, and that we all can't be just one cookie cutter person. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit more about kind of what exactly is health at every size. And it really is about respect, accepting and respecting the diversity of body shapes and sizes, and really honoring all of those assets that were quoted in that last slide, to honor people for who they are. And really having a critical awareness that while nutrition may play a role in your and in preventing chronic disease, other factors have even a more profound impact on your health. So social determinants of health, including racism, economic status, access to healthcare, and where you live, can really affect our health. Trauma of an adverse childhood experience, that's also known as HAES, is known to have a effect on 5 of the top 10 leading causes of death. And that our relationships and social connections, so loneliness or social isolation, all can have really profound effects on our health. And really the research is showing this, yet we still kind of come back to thinking that just our weight is what is making us unhealthy. And just really focusing on compassionate self-care, promoting individual, appropriate, enjoyable, and life-enhancing physical activity. So not using exercise as punishment, as Lisa mentioned in one of her slides. And how can we just really have quality of life and do the things we enjoy. Next slide, please. So this is just a really nice depiction of kind of the components of health at every size. And as you can see, intuitive eating is one of the major parts of that. And also, as I just mentioned, the joyful movement can help with the health at every size. Stress management is really important, and all of the social determinants of health, can definitely cause increased stress in our lives. And there's good research to show that stress really impacts, different levels of things in our health. So it's important to manage your stress. And quality of sleep also is being shown to be very important for managing weight and blood sugars and stress levels and depression. So making sure you get quality of sleep is very important. The 5 principles of health at every size include weight inclusivity. So this is the concept that an ideal body weight is the weight that allows you to feel strong and energetic and lets you lead a healthy, normal life. So that might not fit into kind of the criteria of a healthy BMI that is used so often. And another principle is health enhancement, and this supports health policies that improve and equalize access to information and services and personal practices that improve human well-being, including attention to individual, physical, economic, social, spiritual, emotional, and other needs. A lot of times it can be really problematic in the health field because so often weight is used as the reason why you might have joint pain or a health issue. And so the doctors will not send patients to go see physical therapy like they would a thin person. So really remembering that we all should have access to the same resources for our health. Another principle is to be eating for well-being. So promoting flexible, individualized eating based on your hunger, satiety, nutritional needs, and pleasure, rather than externally regulated eating plans. So again, back to just kind of where the messaging's coming from for how we're going to be eating. The fourth principle is respectful care. So acknowledging our biases and work to end weight discrimination, weight stigma, and economic status, race, gender, and sexual orientation, age, and other identities impact weight stigma, and support environments that address these inequities. And then the final principle is life-enhancing movement. And so again, just to support physical activities that allow people of all sizes, abilities, and interests to engage in enjoyable movement to the degree that they choose. So next slide, please. Thank you. This is just more additional resources for places to learn more about all of these concepts. And I think that is it. Next slide, please. So then these are some of the questions that are often brought up when you talk about these different concepts. So we thought we would kind of discuss these questions, and then we'll open up the floor to other questions. The first question, talking about the health risks associated with health at every size. We're not going to focus on that. We're going to really kind of have a response kind of like to be clear about behavior changes, valuable, but you can't remove stressors you face, no matter how you change your eating or your activity habits. The factors that make up your life world, discrimination, stigma, job insecurity, poverty, and caregiver responsibilities will remain unchanged, and naming inequity systemically, working towards a fairer world is important not only on a systemic level, but an individual level, and naming and acknowledging social roots and health inequities can lighten self-blame. So really thinking about discussing this with people who are giving pushback about this movement. And we're all on a learning continuum about it. And so it is kind of new concepts to kind of be thinking about, but just really to know that we can help everybody to be healthier and have access to good care.
We have a couple of other questions. Diana, did you want to open it up, or do you want to continue kind of going through these ones?
Yeah, sure. So we thought to have this slide with the Q&A as some common questions that are typically asked in the when talking about intuitive eating and health at every size. But at this point, we'd really love to also open up the floor to you all. If anyone in this room has a question or wants to discuss or make clear a concept that that you'd love these dietitians to discuss, please feel free to ask. I have a question in from Wendy here that asks, what are your thoughts about people who are challenged by moderation? For example, been vegan for 20 years, and the fact that I decided that meat, fish, dairy, and eggs are not a part of my diet made it remarkably easy to not eat them, noting that was for ethical reasons, not health. As we're working towards a whole food, plant-based diet, it would mean that being a vegan, there'd be an emphasis on limited processed foods, including oil and salt. So I guess the overall question is, do you see that approach as unhealthily restricted? What are your thoughts and opinions on there?
Yeah, I can discuss that a little bit. It actually kind of reminds me of the second question on the slide too. So I think this comes up a lot as well. Can we practice intuitive eating if we have specific health concerns or restrictions, including for ethical purposes? And I just want to say, yes, absolutely. So I think one of the things with intuitive eating is that it's meant to be this flexible framework that is adapted to your lifestyle. So maybe you have religious beliefs or, ethical concerns around certain types of food, and that's totally okay. Similarly with health concerns. One of the cool parts of intuitive eating that, sometimes can take, I think, work probably with a registered dietitian is that there is that gentle nutrition component, which is really meant to be tailored for you. So I follow a vegan diet, so I don't eat this, this, and this. How am I making sure that I'm still getting myself biologically fed, and it's with foods that I enjoy, and that I am maintaining flexibility around that? So I think that's where the piece of gentle nutrition is really kind of malleable and can fit with whatever you're looking to do, kind of in terms of your diet, just overall eating pattern and dietary pattern based on your beliefs.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Next question, and it's amazing how the questions do tie together. It's similar to the question in bullet 3. How can we work on making peace with our food, but also not overindulge? In terms like practicing intuitive eating without overthinking our foods or overindulging.
Yeah, so I think this is, these are wonderful questions. I think that they tie in so well with the questions on the slides because they are kind of the most common big picture questions and misconceptions around intuitive eating at Health at Every Size. It can sound like a lot. You look at this slide, it has 10 principles on it, and it seems like I need to do this, this, and this. How do I intuitively eat? It's quite overwhelming to think about as a whole sometimes. But I think the idea of intuitive eating, again, as a nonlinear process, will kind of take you in different directions at times. So we give ourselves this period of unconditional permission to eat all the foods, and that truly means all of the foods, kind of, moderation be gone, essentially. So when you're coming from a restrictive mindset or a dieting background, there are often foods that you might gravitate towards, and they might be foods that you have been told or you understand to be kind of less health promoting. And I think that can be really scary at times because you'll often hear people, the first question they ask with intuitive eating is, well, I'm just going to eat donuts and pizza every single meal for a week. Or I'm going to eat French fries or, something like that, something that they perceive to be junk food. And I think the answer that you would hear probably from a clinician would be, that's okay. That's what you need to do on your own intuitive eating journey. And we can't really put kind of a timestamp on that. It may happen for a couple of days, it may be for a couple of months, but as you kind of give yourself that allowance to eat this food, you take away the power that the food has, and in turn, you likely will start to crave it less. It seems counterintuitive, but really that is kind of how our brain works, is once we don't have those food labels, we know that we can have the donut whenever we want. And we can also have some vegetables or fruit or a salad. And so you'll see that kind of your overall eating will normalize over some span of time. So I think that's one way, just giving yourself that grace during the intuitive eating journey can help you avoid overthinking it.
And I was going to add to that too, is that I just picked up a wonderful book by Evelyn Triboli called Intuitive Eating for Every Day. And it's just a 365 daily practices kind of, so just helping to kind of practice and work through a lot of these concepts in small little bits so it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming. And it looks like it's going to be a really great book. I've just started to kind of dive into it.
Beautiful. And in that beautiful, well-rounded way, that also addressed the fourth question we have on our slide. How can we navigate around shame and guilt when it comes to eating food we crave? That I think you covered that very beautifully. The next question we have is, if one of your medical providers focuses on weight, what are some simple strategies for responding to them around these concepts?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think as dietitians, I do think we are trying to educate the providers as we can, so that they're more familiar with these concepts and more comfortable with them as well. And I guess maybe just bringing it up with your provider and asking, telling them that you've read some information, or maybe even bringing in some, stuff you've printed out about this information, so that they know that it's well documented and well researched, would be maybe one way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. I think another thing you could do is just share your preference not to be weighed, if that's what you would prefer. And that can help kind of send the message that, I don't really want to know my weight. I don't think that it's an important component of my overall health picture. So that can kind of be an indirect strategy too. And then one thing I've heard, more so in an outpatient setting, and I don't have experience with this, but I have heard that people have, if they're working with a registered dietitian, have asked their dietitian to contact the doctor and write a letter, or, have some form of dialogue that says, hey, this is what I'm working on with this individual. And when you provide this messaging around weight being important for their health, it's counter to what we're working on together. And here's why this is important for their overall well-being. So that could be kind of a higher level strategy too.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And along that lines, a question was asked, has the Health at Every Size initiative been communicated to UW Medicine medical providers as a whole?
I do know that one of the providers I work with in the adult medicine clinic, who is a professor at the UW, is a big proponent of this and has done a few lectures to kind of introduce these concepts.
Fascinating. So, can you repeat the name of the
Yeah, her name is Margaret Isaac. She's one of the providers in adult medicine clinic.
Oh. All right, just putting that in the chat room. Wonderful. And I see a hand raised there for Anna.
Yeah. Yes. Hi. I'm on my phone, so it's hard to type in the chat.
Sure.
I wanted to ask a question as an instructor of students who, will be out in the world soon, that will be referring clients to dietitians and maybe seeing folks that might benefit from this type of like intuitive eating, mindful eating thought process. How would you recommend as an instructor to help the students find the right words to bring this up with as they promote healthcare and health benefits to their patients and clients?
Other people can interject too, but I would recommend probably reading some of the information that's out there, either the books by Lindo Bacon, including The Surprising Truth About Your Weight or Body Respect, or any of the intuitive eating books by Evelyn Triboli. I think that would be a good place to kind of start to feel comfortable around the terminology and the concepts.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think to follow up with that, if I'm understanding the question properly, so gearing students towards having the language to talk about this with their future patients, I think, which another tool beyond what Karen said too is just, emphasizing the importance of active listening skills, because often some of these things will pop up when you're just getting a history on someone or when you're having a conversation. So really kind of helping your students understand that you need to listen to the person's experience, and kind of you can figure out ways to dive into the conversation from there, but you'll often kind of gather the background information that you need. And then you can just, again, be curious with your patient and say, I know of this thing, this framework. Would you be interested in hearing about it at all? So that's just another tool, I think.
And since we're on the line of this topic, Darla, I'll have you ask your question after, but I saw a few questions there about, again, talking about this. Since diet culture is so pervasive, do you have suggestions on how to redirect or ask others to stop talking about diet culture with you?
That's really challenging. I find that in my personal life, this happens all the time when I'm hanging out with friends. Like, all they can talk about is the cleanse that they're doing or the Whole30 that they're doing. And then they look at me and they're like, well, why don't you diet? You're a dietitian. This is what you do. So it is really, really hard. And it's hard to redirect conversations when people are so ingrained in it. And oftentimes I kind of just avoid the conversation and change the topic to something else, because it's so uncomfortable, like, to always be talking about diet culture and to always be talking about, you know, this and that, about, you know, foods that are allowed and not allowed. And it's exhausting. I don't know if anybody else has any better tools, but I usually just try to change the subject.
Yeah, I think one thing I've heard is kind of assessing how you're feeling in that moment and being willing to pick your battles. So, you know, how do I feel? Am I mentally ready to combat this? Do I have a response for it? Do I feel like it? That can help make sure that you're not getting exhausted and depleted, because it's okay to just, you know, tap out and say, okay, I don't feel like really bringing this up right now. I'm just going to change the topic, or I'm just going to kind of let it rest. So that's one thing, assessing how you feel, assessing whether the other person, one phrase I've heard is, I think it's like reachable, teachable, and ready to learn or something. So if you think that that person would be receptive to the message, sure. If you feel up to it, you could kind of, you know, probe a little bit and see if they're willing to have a conversation. But if it seems like, you know, their opinion's not going to change, one thing that's kind of, you know, protective for your mental health can just be to do what you need to do. It's okay to set a boundary and just let it be. So setting those mental boundaries for yourself, and then you can also set boundaries in conversation. If you're feeling like that's okay, you can just say, hey, you know, I really don't want to talk about this right now, or it's not okay with me if we discuss this. And I think that if you're in close relationships with people, they'll be totally understanding of your own needs and boundaries.
And I was also going to say, I think that you can sometimes pick people that feels very safe to practice these conversations with. And then as the conversations get easier, then it can be easier to have it with people that you maybe don't have quite that strong bond with.
Beautiful. I see a beautiful text here with some advice that someone wants to share. A good thing you can say is, I know you're trying to help me. However, your words make me feel blank, sad, angry, whatever emotion that you wish to share. And it's amazing how this concept also seems to tie into boundary work, yeah, all of it ties together. Darla, I'll go ahead and open the floor up to you to ask your question. Oops.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I just wondered how you could help, how diabetics can apply the eating until they feel full, because you have to take insulin based on an amount of food before you eat.
Yeah, Lisa and I are both CDEs, so we can maybe tag team this question. And you know, you might have to just do a set amount of carbohydrate with your meal. So you can base your insulin dosage on that. But then incorporating other foods like proteins and vegetables to like help you get to the fullness. And I oftentimes will recommend that with patients that, you know, if they've eaten a plate of food and they're still hungry, to go back for the non-carb foods to help them feel satiated. So that's usually my focus when I'm working with people with diabetes who are wanting to have a healthy, balanced diet.
Thank you.
Lisa, I don't know if you have any other suggestions.
I was just thinking that, even if you have diabetes, you can still check in with your body and kind of see what you actually feel like eating. And then, your insulin's gonna be based off the amount of carbohydrate that you have. So if you feel like eating 2 pieces of pizza and you know that there's, say, 30 grams of carbs per slice of pizza, you can say, okay, I'm gonna have 2 pieces of pizza, but then that's not gonna be enough food for me. So then how can I also balance this meal so that I feel full? So maybe you add a salad, or you add some, frozen broccoli, or you add an extra protein side, or something that's gonna help you feel full. But I think really it comes down to, you can eat whatever foods you actually feel like eating. You just have to kind of pay attention to, is it balanced? And then, kind of pay attention to how many carbs are going to be in that meal so that you can balance your insulin to that carbohydrate.
Yep.
Wonderful. And this question was actually asked to be, it circles back to the concept that you'd all spoken to about restrictive eating and eating in a way that allows food to lose its power over you. I totally get what you said about that concept, but if you have medical issues that make you so tired and you don't feel like cooking, and you go towards the unhealthy food all of the time, because it's the easiest fix, what can a person do to address that, remedy that? Do you have any thoughts?
I usually encourage frozen vegetables whenever possible, because they're so easy and they never go bad. They can stay in your freezer for a long time. So if they just have a freezer stocked full of, carrots and broccoli and cauliflower, and then microwaving it takes, a minute. And then they can pair that with whatever really quick food they're also making. So if it's canned soup, or if it's macaroni and cheese, they're at least trying to add in some foods that are beneficial to their body, instead of feeling like they have to restrict foods.
And I would also just say to give yourself grace. If you're dealing with such health issues that it's causing you to feel so tired, that maybe you take a step back from the expectation of having a healthy diet, and just really give yourself some grace.
Beautifully said.
I would like to just chime in for a moment too. I work with a nutritionist last year, and that really helped me put some things in perspective. She had this concept, and you tell me what do you think about it, of adding rather than removing, adding, kind of like fresh vegetables, fresh greens, use frozen vegetables because it's easy. And so just add to your meals rather than focusing on removing.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I think we'd all agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Okay. And we still got some time to open the floor up to any questions. I'm going to circle back to see if there are any. Oh, here's one. I'm trying to practice mindful eating, but find myself having a lot of resistance. Thoughts on how to address that, and any tips on better registering my body's cue for hunger?
I guess one thing to note with this is if you do have a history of, restrictive eating or dieting in any way, your internal cues can kind of be dysregulated for a certain amount of time. And so, just knowing that you might need to give yourself a little more time as you're allowing the unconditional permission to eat, and your body's kind of getting back into a natural flow, that those cues may return. One way to think about it is if somebody has a history of an eating disorder, that has really suppressed their internal cues, basically. So you need to allow yourself some time to kind of resolve those underlying issues. And then I think one thing that I've seen just in personal experience with friends that are, or, you know, people that are working on mindful eating is there is, again, this tendency to overthink. And so, you know, not every meal will we be able to sit down and say, okay, what level hunger am I? What do I need to do? It just might not be there because many people just live such busy lives. So like Karen had just said, giving yourself grace and realizing that the ideal is mindful eating, but not every meal will look like that. And especially most likely not at first. So that's kind of just a general response. Do you have anything to add, Karen or Lisa?
No, that sounds good.
Beautiful. And that again ties into this, well, it also helps address another question asked by Mary: how can I tell when I'm feeling hungry versus having emotions like loneliness? Anything you want to add to that?
I feel like, you know, we have definitely tried to like tamp down emotions. Oftentimes it's kind of in our culture to be strong and resilient and never like have any hard emotions, and so it definitely is taking time and, you know, really thinking about it and practicing it, you know, and seeing, does eating something make me feel better, or do I still feel the same? Yeah, it's a tough one though, because, you know, we sometimes like try to like avoid our emotions, or avoid hunger for that matter too. So it takes some practice.
Sure does.
I think with that too is just really checking in with your body. I find this in my own life. It's like I go during the day and I don't have a second to think. And like the second that I put my daughter down to bed, I'm immediately looking for food, because it's like my one time of day that's like I can take a breath, and it's like, oh, everything, all my stress, everything. I just like, I don't know why I just crave food at the end of the night, because it's just like the day is just so busy, and now I finally have time to sit down and think about it. And I find that when I go through my cupboards, I want the sweets, right? The cookies and the candy, whatever is in there. And sometimes, you know, eating does make me feel better, but sometimes I'm like, I see the cookie, but it's not what I want. Like there's something else that I'm craving right now. And it's almost like you have to take a pause and you have to just check in with yourself and be like, what do I actually feel like eating? Because sometimes we, you know, see the cookie and we think, oh, that's a bad food. And so then we eat around the cookie, right? We're like, oh, I'll just eat all the foods that are in my house because I'm trying to avoid that cookie. When really it's like, if I just ate the cookie, I would have felt better. But sometimes I'm like, you know what? Sometimes I just haven't drank enough during the day, and just having like a hot cup of tea actually makes me feel perfectly fine. And so it takes practice. I mean, this has been a lifelong journey for me. But it's just like just taking that pause and just checking in with yourself for, you know, 10 seconds and just really identifying what your body needs. And then allowing yourself to also have that. If it is a cookie, like allowing yourself to have that and being okay with it.
Beautifully said. Thank you for that. And I think this will be our last question since we're nearing the top of the hour. These are all wonderful concepts that we discussed and so important to share. And what are some key strategies to support learning these concepts for school-age children?
This is a great one. I'm a 7-year-old.
Lisa, yeah, you should take the lead.
Honestly, the only thing that I do with her is like, no foods are off limits. Like she is allowed to eat whatever food is in the house. She always asks, and that like 99% of the time I say it's fine to eat, right? Like I don't want to set up that thought that like cookies are bad, but carrots are good, right? So like sometimes I'll even serve dessert with the meal so that she can decide what she wants to eat and what time she wants to eat it. Like there really is no difference whether she eats dessert first or last in the meal. In the terms of like the calories and everything that she eats, it's all going to come out to be equal because she's going to eat it at the end anyways. And so really just allowing them to have that space to just have all foods, right? And she's a great eater because she'll eat fruits and she'll eat vegetables and she'll eat meat. And like, it's almost like you have to set the plate up where there's one food from every food group, including dessert. And then you just allow them to eat as they want to eat. And you have to kind of step away and not be kind of a helicopter parent in terms of how much they're eating and what they're eating. Because it's a lifelong journey. It's not something that your body just knows in 5 minutes. And so like teaching them as they're learning how to eat that all foods are allowed. And then kids are so good with knowing when they're full. Like you can put ice cream in front of my daughter, and if she's full, she'll stop eating it, right? So like as we go throughout life, we kind of override those cues. But kids are so good with knowing when they're done. So I think just allowing all foods and not kind of teaching them that there's good and bad foods is really kind of how you kind of set them up for success.
And Ellen Satter is a really good resource who's done lots of work around feeding children and feeding your family. So she's a really good resource.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much for holding this space and for engaging in this very, very enlightening discussion. Thank you again. And to everyone who's joined in, stayed, and asked questions, we so appreciate you all being here. This recording is going to go out to everyone who's registered, all of you who wish to revisit these concepts or revisit the recording are more than welcome to access it. So thank you all again. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone.